They were flying tomorrow's war. The whispered confession, laced with cold dread, was spoken by an Allied engineer kneeling in the German mud, staring at the enemy's shattered masterpiece. April 1945. The war in Europe was grinding to its inevitable, bloody end. But the air still carried the metallic tang of fire, scorched oil, and profound defeat. Across a broken German airfield near Munich, U.S. infantrymen moved cautiously through hangars, pocked with the scars of battle bullet holes, blast craters, and twisted metal. The battle was over, but the resulting silence felt heavy, dangerous, like the immense pause before history itself exhales. Then, one of the forward scouts spotted it, a strange, sleek shape, half buried in the churned mud, twin-engine nacelles, sharply swept wings, a glass canopy shattered like intricate ice. The soldiers stopped, their rifles lowering slowly. It looked nothing like the Messerschmitt 109 or the Focke-Wulf 190 they were used to seeing. This wasn't a prop plane at all. This was something utterly alien. They pulled away the protective, oil-soaked tarp. The brilliant spring sunlight hit the bare metal smooth, unpainted gray. The tail displayed the stark designation, Me-262, the first operational jet fighter in history. Inside the cockpit, the dials were scorched, but the layout felt unnervingly advanced. Instruments were marked in kilometers per hour, stretching impossibly past 900. The twin-engine throttle was double-jointed. The control pedals felt feather-light. Even damaged, the machine looked alive, lethal, and impossibly fast. The sergeant immediately called for an engineering assessment. A crew chief from the 9th Air Force knelt beside the jet, ran his gloved hand along the engine intake, and froze. The metal wasn't the common steel they used. It was a dense nickel-chromium alloy, lightweight, highly heat-resistant, the kind the Allies were still desperately struggling to manufacture in their own labs. He slowly muttered, his voice hollow. They were flying tomorrow's war. For nearly 2 years, Allied bomber pilots had exchanged terrified whispers about a German jet, a fighter so blisteringly fast that even the best P-51 Mustang couldn't hope to catch it. Pilots called it the Ghost, appearing in high-altitude dives, vanishing before anyone could lock on or react. Most commanders had dismissed the reports as war propaganda. Now, the proof lay shattered in the mud. Within hours, specialized U.S. intelligence teams arrived, their movements precise and urgent. The wreck was meticulously dismantled and loaded onto a massive truck. A major overseeing the operation keyed his radio. "We've got one. Intact engines. Repeat. Both engines intact." He didn't know it yet, but that single report would instantly ignite a technological revolution, a brutal clandestine race, not for territory, but for the fundamental future of time itself. Because sealed within that captured machine lay every secret the Germans had desperately tried to hide. Axial compressors, the principle of swept wings, crucial heat shielding, exotic turbine metals, and jet ignition systems far ahead of anything the Allies currently possessed. And as that Me-262 was driven west under heavy armed guard, one terrifying truth became clear. The war for Europe might be ending, but the war for the skies had just begun. Somewhere in California, a sharp-tongued visionary named Dr. Vernon Ace Keller was about to receive the most important, epoch-making crate of his life, and with it, the undeniable blueprint that would finally end an empire's technological dominance. For 2 years, Allied pilots had whispered the dark rumors. The German plane that simply wasn't supposed to exist. It could appear without warning out of the high clouds, flash past at nearly 600 miles per hour, and disappear before any gunner could even hope to track it. They called it the Swallow, Schwalbe in German, sleek, silver, and seemingly untouchable. The Messerschmitt Me-262 was more than just a fighter. It was Germany's final, desperate miracle. The weapon promised to reverse the inevitable course of the war. Reichsmarschall Goering had loudly promised it would sweep the massive Allied bomber formations from the sky. Pilots who flew it genuinely believed they could outrun the bullets themselves. In its brief operational life, it seemed they might be right. The Me-262's twin K9 turbines, rushed into service, could propel it 125 miles per hour faster than the legendary P-51 Mustang. Its climb rate was double that of any piston-engined fighter currently in the air. In extreme test dives, it touched 540, even 560 miles per hour, constantly flirting with the phenomenon of compressibility, the invisible barrier that violently shredded wings and violently locked control surfaces. No Allied aircraft could possibly keep pace. But the miracle came with a profound curse. The K-9 turbines, rushed into desperate production with inferior wartime alloys, lasted only about 10 hours of flight time before fatally disintegrating. Each delicate turbine blade was a chemical compromise, part steel, part ceramic, fragile and unforgiving, under immense heat and pressure. Pilots were strictly instructed to throttle the engines with excruciating gentleness, or risk melting their own turbines mid-flight. One German ace later lamented, "The Me-262 was like a thoroughbred racehorse that broke its leg if you rode it too hard." Its revolutionary design swept wings for high-speed stability. Tricycle landing gear for nose-mounted cannons was impeccable, yet for every Me-262 that actually flew, 3 sat perpetually grounded, waiting for scarce spare parts that never materialized. The jet that could have fundamentally ruled the skies was being brutally strangled by its own technological perfection and the Reich's economic collapse. Still, Allied intelligence feared it intensely. A single Me-262 squadron could scatter a formation of B-17 seconds in minutes. The Luftwaffe's Jagdgeschwader 7 unit claimed dozens of heavy bombers destroyed in its first few missions. American gunners would watch in disbelief as their 50 caliber tracer rounds failed to catch the metallic blur passing through their line of fire. The terrifying myth of the jet grew faster than the planes themselves. Newspapers back home dubbed it Hitler's Lightning. US generals privately called it the Nightmare. But myths are potent only until cold, hard numbers intervene. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe had manufactured over 1,400 Me-262 airframes, but only about 200 ever saw actual combat. Fuel shortages, critical pilot training gaps, and relentless Allied sabotage turned the invincible jet into a crippling ghost fleet. The Allies bombed assembly plants daily, forcing Germany to hide their miracle weapons in forests and deep, winding tunnels. The irony was brutal and absolute. The Germans had engineered the future, but they no longer possessed the means to sustain or use it. So when that captured Me-262 arrived in Allied hands in April 1945, it was not merely a trophy, it was a time machine. Because in Burbank, California, a sharp, small team of engineers was already racing to achieve the exact same feat, and they were failing miserably. Their prototype, the Aurora F-45, couldn't stabilize reliably past 450 miles per hour. The primitive General Electric engines overheated violently, the wings vibrated dangerously, and the airflow threatened to tear the fuselage apart. Then, a massive crate arrived from Europe, officially marked Confidential, IFE. Captured Luftwaffe technical equipment. Inside were detailed turbine schematics, samples of high-heat alloy, and the meticulously recovered fragments of a captured engine labeled K-9 turbine. Dr. Vernon Keller read the intelligence report twice. Then, a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Gentlemen," he announced to his exhausted team, "the enemy just gave us the missing piece." The world's fastest arms race had just violently changed sides. Long before that German jet fell intact into Allied hands, America was already desperately chasing the same engineering ghost. The fundamental concept of jet propulsion had been circulating through laboratories since the late 1930 seconds, a beautiful, terrifying dream of flight without cumbersome propellers, of thrust born violently from controlled heat instead of brute motion. But by 1943, the dream had curdled into a genuine desperation. Piston engines had finally reached their absolute limit. The skies over Europe were thick with smoke and the loss of young men. At 25,000 feet, a P-51 Mustang could escort the bombers, but only barely. The Luftwaffe's best piston fighters still climbed higher, dove faster, and fought with the cold efficiency of engineers who knew their national clock was rapidly running out of time. In Washington, a small, highly secretive committee was hastily formed within the Army Air Forces. Its mission was stark: Catch up to Germany's rumored jet program at any cost. The internal memo read like a dire warning. Adversary aircraft may soon exceed 500 miles per hour. Existing designs will be obsolete within 12 months. That was the moment they placed the call to Dr. Vernon Ace Keller. Keller was only 33 years old, sharp-tongued, famously impatient, and already responsible for some of the most advanced, unconventional aircraft the Allies possessed. His Lockheed P-38 Lightning, with its distinctive twin engines and twin tails, had fundamentally changed the Pacific Air War. But the P-38 was still a piston machine. Keller demanded something faster, something that mocked gravity's old, tired rules. When the Army Air Forces gave him the assignment in 1943, he didn't celebrate. He just asked flatly, "How much time do I have?" "6 months, Doctor." Keller nodded once, the gesture final. "Then you'll get it in 5. The top-secret project was designated XP-80, later nicknamed Lulu Bell, for its beautiful, lethal promise. It was to be a single-seat, single-engine jet that would utilize General Electric's first American turbine, the I-40, itself a crude, heavy copy of Britain's Whittle design. But the I-40 was wildly unpredictable. It violently surged under pressure, stalled without warning mid-flight, and frequently melted components at high altitude. Engineers simply could not figure out why. The compressor stages were too narrow, the blade angles profoundly inefficient. Every desperate fix created new, critical failures. It was like trying to capture a phantom on a drawing board. Meanwhile, reconnaissance photos flowing in from Europe brutally confirmed the nightmare. The Me-262 was terrifyingly real and undeniably operational. It wasn't a fragile prototype. It was flying, fighting, and winning. At Aurora's Burbank plant, tension devolved into obsession. The engineers lived in the massive hangar, sleeping fitfully under their long drafting tables, eating cold sandwiches over complex blueprints. Keller forbade all bureaucracy. No memos, no committees, no delays. He wanted immediate results, not excuses. He constantly told his exhausted team, "We're not fighting the Germans. We're fighting the calendar." What they could not possibly know was that on the other side of the Atlantic, the precise answer to every one of their seemingly insurmountable problems, airflow, compression ratios, heat balance, already existed, perfectly sealed inside the turbine casing of a German jet streaking across the Rhine. All the equations they couldn't solve had already been written, finalized, and combat-tested in Munich. So when that captured Me-262 arrived in crates at Wright Field months later, it was not just an artifact. It was a revelation. Dr. Vernon Keller stood over the brutally dismantled K9 turbine, ran his fingers along the thin, complexly curved blades, and whispered, "So that's how they did it. For 2 long years, America had been attempting to build the future blind. Now, for the first time, they had eyes. Within 72 hours, the jet age in America would begin in earnest, violently born from the wreckage of the enemy's last, desperate hope." By late 1944, the sky over Europe had become a vast, efficient factory of death. Every day, Allied bombers roared across Germany in destructive waves. But behind the vast numbers hid a terrifying, simple equation. The Luftwaffe was vastly outnumbered, utterly outproduced, yet still terrifyingly efficient. The Me-262 was Germany's final, desperate variable in that equation, a weapon designed not to win the war, but to delay its inevitable defeat with unacceptable casualties. The Allies commanded over 12,000 fighters in the air. Germany had barely 1,400 Me-262 seconds ever produced, and only 200 ever made it to the brutality of combat. But every single one of those jets instantly changed the calculus of a bomber crew's survival. At 540 miles per hour, the Me-262 could make a deadly firing pass through a tight bomber formation in just 7 seconds. A B-17 gunner had less than 2 seconds to spot, track, and fire before the jet vanished into the clouds. In its first month of serious service, a single Me-262 squadron shot down 45 heavy bombers. Allied commanders called it aerial attrition mathematics at its worst. But those same numbers also cruelly showed Germany's self-inflicted unraveling. Each Me-262 engine required 8 rare alloys Germany could no longer sustainably produce. Every jet consumed twice the fuel of a piston fighter at idle, while the Reich had less than 5% of its 1,940 fuel reserves. The Me-262's operational lifespan was cripplingly short, less than 20 flight hours before total engine failure. It was a technological masterpiece chained to a rapidly dying economy. Meanwhile, the Americans had weaponized production itself. While Germany crafted perfection slowly by hand, the US built speed by system. A single American plant in Inglewood could turn out 25 P-51 Mustangs a day. Boeing's Seattle lines produced one B-17 every 63 minutes. The Luftwaffe could not possibly fight that kind of industrial arithmetic. Yet, Hitler himself made the fatal mistake worse. Obsessed with offense, he ordered the Me-262, converted from a devastating interceptor to a fighter bomber, adding heavy bomb racks that severely crippled its critical performance. Jet pilots privately called it a suicide decision. By the time Hitler reversed the order, it was far too late. The Allies controlled the air utterly. Germany's remaining airfields were reduced to craters, its fuel depots burning. The Me-262 seconds that did manage to fly had no radar support, no escort, and often no replacement parts. Pilots frequently risked taking off under relentless strafing fire, sometimes with one engine already dying. Yet the numbers still haunted Allied command. Each Me-262 downed required 30 P-51 sorties just to catch it during its only vulnerable moments, takeoff or landing. Even crippled, the jet represented the one thing Germany still possessed: fear. So when the first captured Me-262 was shipped across the Atlantic in 1945, it wasn't sent as a trophy. It was sent as an equation, the cold, hard proof that the future of war would belong to whoever could successfully build and sustain the mathematics of speed. And in Burbank, California, Dr. Vernon Keller was already holding the final answer. The terse message from Washington was short, almost cold. Analyze, replicate, surpass. For the first time in the entire war, America held in its hands not just the enemy's machine, but its very mind. The intense, secretive hunt for German technology began aggressively before the actual shooting stopped. Its codename was Operation LUSTY, short for Luftwaffe Secret Technology. To the engineers and scientists who ran it, the goal was brutally simple. Take everything, every plane, every drawing, every idea. As the Allied armies closed the vice on Germany, a new kind of military unit followed in their immediate wake. Not infantrymen, but scientists, engineers, and test pilots. They were the T-forces, intelligence task groups, specifically tasked with finding the future before a rival power, the Soviets, could. In the spring of 1945, one of those T-force teams, led by Colonel Marcus Vance, reached a small, forgotten airstrip outside Munich. The Luftwaffe had fled in panic, leaving behind hangars full of wrecks and prototypes. But in one far, dark corner of the field sat something different. An Me-262, nearly untouched by fire, its canopy cracked but fundamentally intact, its K9 turbines gleaming under a thin film of dust. Colonel Vance, commander of Operation LUSTY's whizzes, stepped out of a jeep and stared at the jet like an archaeologist, finding a fossil from another world. "Get mechanics," he said quietly. "And fuel. Lots of fuel." For 3 intense days, they worked around the clock under heavy armed guard, patching the fuel lines, scavenging tires from wrecked German trucks, and recharging the battery by hand. Then, in the early dawn of April 28th, 1945, a U.S. test pilot, with a mix of dread and excitement, climbed into the unfamiliar cockpit, adjusted the unfamiliar throttle, and pressed the starter. The K9 turbines coughed, spat a plume of thick black smoke, and then screamed violently to life. The entire airfield stopped to watch. The roar was unlike anything any piston engine could make, a steady, thunderous howl that didn't pulse, but violently surged. The Me-262 rolled forward, lifted gracefully off the ground, and vanished instantly into the clouds. The first captured German jet was airborne under American command. When it landed an hour later, Vance sent a frantic telegram back to headquarters. Jet aircraft successfully recovered and flown. Recommend immediate transfer for study. Within days, the jet was dismantled, loaded carefully into a massive C-54 transport, and flown across the Channel to England. Destination: Farnborough. British engineers tore into it with fascinated intensity, measuring every component, every complex angle of its swept wings. Reports immediately flooded back. New type of axial compressor superior to Allied centrifugal design suggest full duplication, but the final, crucial stop was America. Wright Field, Ohio, the beating heart of U.S. aeronautical intelligence. And from there, a copy of every drawing, every photograph, every calculation was quietly forwarded to Burbank, to Aurora, to Dr. Vernon Keller. The first day the crates arrived, Keller ordered the hangar doors sealed. No reporters, no high-ranking brass, just the dedicated engineers. When they opened the first K9 turbine engine, the massive room fell silent. "Gentlemen," Keller said, his voice ringing with a new authority, "Asterisk, asterisk, we are not here to copy. We are here to learn." The Me-262 had proven what no Allied lab could, that jet flight wasn't a fragile dream, but a stable discipline. Its axial compressor delivered constant, efficient airflow. Its thin, swept wings drastically reduced drag at high speed. Its internal layout showed precisely how to balance weight, heat, and thrust in one seamless, flowing system. By nightfall, Keller had already covered the blueprints with his own calculations. Notes filled the margins, equations in pencil, rough sketches of modifications and improvements. He didn't see a German machine. He saw the perfect skeleton of something greater, a jet that could be reliably mass-produced, instantly battle-ready, and fully sustainable. Operation LUSTY had handed America the enemy's masterpiece. Dr. Vernon Keller would turn it into a weapon of peace, the definitive prototype of a new world. At Wright Field, the Me-262 was treated less like a captured enemy plane and more like an alien artifact. Engineers from Aurora, General Electric, and the Army Air Forces surrounded its dismantled fuselage, sketch pads in hand. On the table lay the heart of the mystery: 2 K9 turbines, their blades glinting like polished bone. To the untrained eye, they looked crude, hand-welded seams, mismatched alloys, rough castings. But to Keller, they were a revelation. Every flaw told a story. Every imperfection hid a fundamental principle. The Germans had used axial compressors, multiple thin stages of spinning blades that pushed air straight through the engine, instead of spinning it outward like Allied centrifugal turbines. The design was inherently harder to build and less durable, but it was infinitely more efficient. It was the missing link America had been blindly groping for in the dark. "This is it," Keller whispered, turning the compressor shaft with his hands. "This is how they broke drag." Within 24 hours, Aurora's engineers began running intense new simulations. Slide rules clattered. Chalk dust flew across the vast drafting boards. The axial principle could make America's experimental jet, the Aurora F-45, up to 18% faster. But it wasn't just the speed. The Me-262's airframe geometry, those gently swept wings, told another critical story. At high subsonic speeds, traditional straight wings created a violent wall of drag that slowed aircraft to near stall. The Germans had unknowingly built a partial cure, wings angled backward by 18.5 degrees, allowing airflow to travel further before compression choked the lift. It was elegant, intuitive, almost poetic. Keller studied the blueprint for hours before grabbing a pencil and sketching a modification to the F-45's leading edge. "A few degrees," he said. "That's all it takes." He was right. When Aurora's wind tunnel team tested the design weeks later, the results were staggering. Airflow separation dropped by nearly a third. Stability increased by half. A borrowed German idea, flawlessly translated and blended with American pragmatism, had just unlocked a new kind of flight. Meanwhile, General Electric engineers dissected the K9's metallurgy. The Germans, desperately short on strategic metals, had been forced to create substitute alloys that could endure higher heat than Allied designs, not because they were fundamentally superior, but because necessity had forced radical creativity. E's metallurgists learned more in a single week of testing than in 2 years of blind guesswork. In a report stamped confidential, one colonel summarized it plainly. They were starving, but still flying faster than we are. Dr. Vernon Keller didn't copy the Me-262. He translated it. He took its essential core efficiency through simplicity and rebuilt it in the American language of mass production. The F-45's J-33 engine became the embodiment of that translation, axial compression reinterpreted through steel, perfectly balanced with Aurora's aerodynamic finesse. By June 1945, Keller's team had shaved 143 days off their original, impossible schedule. The prototype stood gleaming under the hangar lights, its polished skin unpainted, its nose pointed toward a different kind of sky. As the war in Europe faded into silence, the Pacific still burned on. Keller knew what was coming. If we finish this in time, he told his team, we might end the next war before it begins. The blueprints of the Me-262 were no longer German. They were American, now reborn in the furnace of curiosity, smoothed by precision, and destined to fundamentally change the shape of history. Summer 1945. The desert air outside Burbank shimmered under the relentless California sun. Inside an old, repurposed circus tent at the edge of Aurora's sprawling factory sat the future. A handful of engineers, a pile of scavenged equipment, and the half-assembled body of a jet that officially did not exist. They called the project the Skunk Works. To outsiders, it looked like sheer chaos, but to Dr. Vernon Keller, it was organizational perfection. The suffocating Air Force bureaucracy couldn't touch it here. No memos, no delays, no politics, just raw, unfiltered innovation. Men building faster than regulations could catch them. The Me-262's crates had arrived weeks earlier, marked confidential. Do not open without clearance. Keller didn't wait for clearance. He pried them open himself, laying the German blueprints directly next to Aurora's own F-45 drawings. Where the Germans had used exotic, scarce alloys, he ruthlessly substituted standard American metals. Where they'd meticulously hand-forged parts, he designed jigs for immediate mass production. His operational motto was simple: build smarter, not smaller. The first critical element they copied wasn't the engine or the airframe. It was the workflow. Keller studied how the Germans had integrated mechanics, engineers, and test pilots into one unbroken feedback loop. He instantly turned it into doctrine, a system of direct, aggressive collaboration that would later define every secret program from the U-2 to the SR-71 Blackbird. The Aurora F-45 took shape faster than anyone believed possible. The fuselage was a single seamless skin of polished aluminum, designed with no external rivet heads to catch drag. The canopy curved flush with the nose. The wings subtly swept a quiet, powerful nod to what Keller had seen on the Ferd. Me-262 sliced through the air like a scalpel. He ordered the test bed engine installed, General Electric's J-33, built with newly learned German principles, but heavily reinforced with American materials. It wasn't a copy. It was an evolution. Each night, the exhausted team ran the turbine until the hangar glowed orange with intense heat. Locals miles away swore it sounded like a colossal thunderstorm that simply would not stop. On the evening of July 19th, Keller gathered his crew. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice tired but triumphant, "tomorrow we fly America's first production jet." The pilot was test ace Major Rip Sterling. Dawn broke over the San Fernando Valley as he climbed into the cockpit, strapped in, and pushed the throttle forward. The J-33 shrieked a deafening howl. The plane lurched forward, accelerating violently, and before anyone could even speak, it was airborne. The F-45 Lulu Bell left the ground smooth and steady, trailing nothing but a thin shimmer of heat. Keller watched silently from the runway, arms crossed, a half-smile beneath his unlit cigarette. 6 minutes later, Sterling's voice crackled through the radio, calm and strangely awestruck. "Asterisk, asterisk, Keller, this bird doesn't fly. She glides like a bullet." The first American jet had flown, and it hadn't just worked, it had instantly won. The Me-262 was now irrevocably obsolete. In one flawless flight, the balance of air power shifted forever. The Luftwaffe's miracle weapon, once the terror of the skies, was reduced to a mere relic, a necessary stepping stone that had built its own replacement. The world didn't know it yet, but in that makeshift tent in Burbank, the foundations of post-war aviation had been laid. The Skunk Works wasn't just a project anymore. It was a philosophy. From that day on, Keller issued a promise to his team, a rule that became legend. Be fast, be quiet, be on time. And if it doesn't work, fix it before anyone notices. America's next century of flight had just begun. Born not from national privilege, but from stolen blueprints, sleepless nights, and the sheer audacity to build the impossible in a circus tent. The war was ending. The jet age was taking off. Winter 1945. The war in Europe was over. But in the skies over the vast Pacific, the conflict still raged with brutal, unforgiving clarity. Every flight was a desperate race, not against the clock, but against sudden, fiery death. Japan's airfields were being reduced to ash, but their pilots fought like suicidal ghosts. That's when the terse telegram arrived at Aurora's facility. Deploy one prototype jet to theater. Immediate evaluation under combat conditions. Doctor. Vernon Keller read it twice. He knew what it meant. The F-45, Shooting Star, was going to war before it even had a flight manual. The plane was crated, shipped hastily to the front, and reassembled on a coral strip in Okinawa. Mechanics wiped oil off its polished wings, staring in disbelief. They'd never seen anything like it. No propellers, no deafening roar of pistons, just a smooth, predatory hum. The Japanese still fielded some of the fastest piston fighters in history, but this was utterly different. The F-45 could pass 500 miles per hour. The first combat sortie was simple, a test flight with escort. But war doesn't respect tests. 15 minutes in, radar spotted bogies, twin-engine Ki-45 seconds, closing fast. The escorting P-51 seconds turned to intercept, but the jet was already gone. The F-45's pilot, Lieutenant Russell Buzz Brown, slammed the throttle forward. The J-33 howled like a hurricane trapped in metal. The aircraft instantly leapt from 300 to 450 miles per hour in seconds, slicing through the humid air like a blade. He pulled up a near-vertical climb. The Japanese planes tried desperately to follow, but their engines gasped for air at 20,000 feet. Brown leveled off, turned inverted, and dropped straight back down through the formation. The sky flashed with tracer fire, but none found him. 2 bursts, 2 kills. The F-45 vanished into a dive, then leveled, its vapor trail a thin white streak across the dawn. The radio crackled with disbelief. "What the hell was that?" asked one Mustang pilot. Brown laughed, the sound strained but ecstatic. Something new. By the time he landed, the field crews swarmed the plane. The engines hissed as they cooled, metal ticking in the tropical air. Brown stepped out, grinning through oil-streaked goggles. "She can run circles around anything with a propeller," he confirmed. The report that followed was stamped top secret. It described not a mere plane, but a revolution. The F-45's speed and climb rate exceeded every operational fighter in the Pacific by over 25%. Maintenance hours were cut in half. The jet was stable, predictable, and terrifyingly fast. And here was the irony that no one missed. The technology born in Germany, refined in California, had just violently rewritten the rules of air combat over Asia. It was poetic. The final phase of the global war ended by an airplane that embodied both sides of it. When Dr. Vernon Keller received the after-action report back in Burbank, he didn't smile. He simply said, "Now we build the next one." That next one would become the Lockheed F-94, and then the F-104 Starfighter, each generation faster, leaner, and more precise than the last. The jet duel that began over Okinawa wasn't just another mission. It was the symbolic passing of the torch, from the age of propellers and blind courage to the age of thrust and pure mathematics. And in that pivotal moment, one truth became clear to every engineer who'd ever held a wrench or a slide rule. Wars aren't won by machines. They are won by the men who refuse to stop improving them. The F-45 wasn't built to win a single battle. It was built to make every battle after it impossible. The spring of 1946 arrived quietly. Across Europe, the smoke had lifted. The skies that once roared with the fury of engines now hummed with the sound of reconstruction. Yet in hangars and workshops across America, the silence meant something else. Evolution. The jet had arrived, and the propeller was dead. At Wright Field, engineers wheeled the old P-51 Mustang next to an F-45 Shooting Star. To the naked eye, they looked like cousins, but under the skin, they were from different worlds. The Mustang's magnificent Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, a masterpiece of pistons and pressure, looked ancient beside the sleek, tubular turbine of the F-45. The difference wasn't just speed, it was philosophy. One fought against the air, the other danced with it. Reports confirmed what no pilot could deny. At 30,000 feet, the Mustang struggled. The F-45, by contrast, accelerated. Its power wasn't mechanical, it was chemical, almost primal. A single throttle push sent it screaming forward, climbing 7,000 feet per minute. No vibration, no hesitation. The Mustang had ended the war. The F-45 had ended an era. Even the captured Luftwaffe aces, brought stateside as consultants under Operation Paperclip, admitted defeat. One German test pilot, once an Me-262 instructor, reportedly stared at the F-45's cockpit for a full minute before saying, "We would have built this too, if we had time." But that was the American advantage. Time, resources, and a fierce refusal to stop. Where Germany engineered miracles in desperation, America engineered momentum. Dr. Vernon Keller's Skunk Works grew from a secret tent into an empire. Within a year, his team began work on the XF-90, the F-94, and the first complex swept-wing prototypes that would define the Korean War and beyond. The critical lessons from that captured Me-262. Its axial airflow, its metallurgy, its design pain lived on in every drawing they made. For the pilots, the change was spiritual. The sound of a jet engine wasn't a roar. It was a whisper that built into a scream, pure and elemental. It didn't shake the cockpit, it pulled it. And once you flew one, you couldn't go back. Old veterans of the Air War said it best. Propellers were courage. Jets were destiny. The Air Force agreed. By 1947, piston engine fighters were ruthlessly phased out of frontline service. The Mustang became a relic, its glory frozen in the grainy film reels. The new world belonged to thrust, to burn, to the endless sky. But buried in that transformation was a final irony. The jet that had changed everything, that had ended the air war, was born directly from the wreckage of the enemy. And that, perhaps, was the truest victory. Not destruction, but transformation. The ability to take the weapons of tyranny and turn them instantly into tools of human progress. From the mud of Germany to the sun-bleached runways of California, one machine bridged the gap between past and future. The F-45 wasn't just America's first jet. It was proof that war, for all its horror, can sometimes ignite the very spark that ensures peace. At 600 miles per hour, peace had a new sound, a deep, rising note that spoke not of fear, but of possibility. By the dawn of the 1950 seconds, the names had changed: Shooting Star, Starfire, Sabre. But their DNA still carried the same ghost, the Me-262 that fell into American hands in a muddy field, and the man who refused to let it stay an enemy's secret. Dr. Vernon Keller's team didn't just build jets, they built the future. Their workshop evolved into the most secretive, most successful engineering division in the world, Aurora's Skunk Works. From that humble tent came legends: the U-2 that saw the invisible, the SR-71 that outran missiles, the F-117 that bent radar itself. Every one of them traced its lineage back to that single, defining moment of curiosity in 1945, when an engineer turned a captured German engine in his hands and whispered, "This is how they broke drag." The F-45 became more than an aircraft. It was a pivot point. In just 2 years, it shattered the record books, training the first generation of jet pilots who would later dominate Korea and fundamentally define modern air combat. America hadn't just caught up with Germany's technology, It had surpassed it. By 1953, the U.S. Air Force could claim what no other nation could. Air supremacy backed not by overwhelming numbers, but by engineering velocity. Every time an F-45 roared across the Pacific, every time a Thunderjet climbed over the Alps, they carried an unspoken truth. War may begin with destruction, but victory belongs to those who learn fastest. The engineers called it progress. The pilots called it salvation. And at the heart of it all stood a paradox, that the path to peace had been paved with stolen blueprints, sleepless nights, and the courage to test what no manual approved. The Me-262 had once been Hitler's miracle. It ended as America's blueprint. The F-45, born from that captured metal, proved that victory isn't just about who fights hardest. It's about who adapts fastest. When jet trails first painted the skies of post-war Europe, old veterans looked up and said the same thing again and again. That's the sound of a world that will never go backward. From that moment on, the sky was no longer a battlefield. It was a laboratory. And every plane that has since broken the sound barrier, touched the edge of space, or returned from it, owes a quiet, crucial debt to that muddy airfield in Germany, and the men who dared to see not the enemy's weapon, but humanity's next step forward. Because in the end, history doesn't remember who laughed first. It remembers who flew fastest.